They gave me a standing ovation for a lie. They toasted my silence as a virtue. Their fatal mistake was believing I didn't understand the difference. They thought their narrative was the only one that mattered. They were wrong. I had been writing the final chapter for a very long time. He handed me a champagne glass filled with apple juice. They all watched me take a sip, their smiles a little too fixed. Their fatal mistake was believing I wouldn't taste the difference. My brother clapped me on the shoulder, his grip just a bit too tight. I smiled back, just as I always had. The game, however, was no longer theirs to play. The rehearsal dinner was a study in soft light and expensive linen. Laughter pooled around my brother, Robert, like water around a stone. He stood at the head of the long table, commanding the room without raising his voice. A story about his latest real estate deal had everyone leaning in. I sat halfway down, near a centerpiece of white orchids that blocked my view of our mother. This was not an accident. Seating arrangements here are never an accident. I watched the server refill my water glass. He did not refill Robert's. Robert's glass was never empty. Someone was always there to attend to it before he could notice its depletion. This is a small thing. You notice these small things when you are the one who is often overlooked. The rhythm of the room pulsed around him. A joke was met with timed laughter. A comment was met with earnest agreement. I took a slow sip of water. It was very cold. My role was simple. Be present, be quiet, be agreeable. I had mastered all three. When Robert's eyes flicked to me during a lull, it was my cue. "Don't you agree, George?" he asked, his voice warm with fraternal condescension. It wasn't really a question. It was a prompt for validation. I gave a small, conceding nod. "Robert usually has the right idea," I said, my voice just loud enough for her immediate cluster to hear. The expected chuckle rippled out. Robert's smile deepened, and he moved on, satisfied. The ecosystem was in balance. Later, by the stone fireplace, our father gripped my arm. His touch was brief, impersonal, like a manager steering an employee. "Big day tomorrow for your brother," he said, not looking at me. His gaze was fixed on Robert across the room, a look of pure, uncomplicated pride. A real milestone. He didn't mention that I had passed the same milestones years earlier. He never did. I simply nodded. "It's a proud day for all of us," I replied. The script was worn smooth from use. The verbal habit is subtle. You have to listen for it. Robert doesn't just state an opinion. He frames it as collective wisdom. "Let's be honest," he'll begin, or we all know. He used it that night, discussing the wedding. "Let's be honest," he said, swirling his scotch. "The open bar is a necessary expense. We all know people remember a dry wedding." He said we, but he meant I. He said people, but he was looking at our frugal uncle, silently marking his disapproval. It's a brilliant tactic. Disagree with him, and you're not just disagreeing with Robert, you're disagreeing with the honest consensus of the room. You're arguing against what we all know. I've watched him do it for 30 years. I've never once pointed it out. As the night wound down, I offered to help the wedding planner with some final logistics. It was a quiet task, sorting place cards for the vendor tables. Robert found me in the small side office. "There you are," he said, filling the doorway, hiding with the help. It was delivered with a smile, a brotherly tease. But the categorization was clear. Me with the hired help, him with the family. "Just making sure everything's perfect for you," I said, not looking up from the cards. He lingered for a moment, watching me work. "I appreciate it, George. Really, you're dependable." He said it like it was the highest praise he could muster for me. Then he was gone, off to receive more important guests. I finished the task. I placed the last card. The room was very quiet. In the silence, I could feel the architecture of our family, solid as the house we grew up in. I was not a foundation stone. I was decorative, trim easily removed, barely noticed if gone. They believed their own design was permanent. They believed my compliance was a structural feature. They were wrong. It was a realization that arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a lock. The lock on my brother's study door at our parents' house. He'd asked me, months ago, to drop off some documents there. "The keys, under the blue vase," he'd said. That night, after the rehearsal, I saw the vase was gone. The key was not elsewhere. The door was simply locked. A small thing. An oversight, perhaps. But in a family where every detail is a message, there are no oversights. Only confirmations. I stood before the locked door for a full minute. Then I walked away. I didn't mention it. I didn't ask. I simply stored the fact away, a single piece of data in a growing file. The taste of apple juice in a champagne flute. The pressure of a hand on my arm. The smile that doesn't reach the eyes. The locked door. The wedding was tomorrow. There would be speeches. Robert, of course, would give the main one. He had volunteered me to speak as well, months ago, in front of everyone. George has a way with words, he'd said, patting my back. Keep it short and sweet, won't you? The instruction was a kindness in front of others, a containment in reality. I returned to my hotel room. I did not rage. I did not plot. I sat by the window, watching the lights of the town that had always seen Robert as its golden sun. I felt a profound, settling calm. The kind that comes not from deciding to start a war, but from finally, clearly seeing the battlefield that has always existed. I had my speech prepared. It was, as instructed, short and sweet. It was also entirely irrelevant. The words I would actually say were forming themselves in the quiet part of my mind, the part they never believed was paying attention. They were simple words, true words. They required no shouting. They just required a microphone, and a room full of people who thought they knew exactly who I was. When you've spent a lifetime being politely ignored, what do you think they'll notice first, your silence? Or the truth you've finally decided to share? The betrayal wasn't in the words he used. It was in the silence he crafted for me. The wedding ceremony was a flawless production. Robert stood at the altar, the very picture of dependable charm. His vows were confident, touching, and perfectly timed. He cried a single, photogenic tear. From my seat in the front row, I had a clear view of our mother dabbing her eyes. Our father's chest puffed with pride. The organist played. The pastor beamed. It was a scene from a catalogue, and my brother was the centerfold. The reception was held under a vast white tent on the grounds of a country club he'd recently joined. Strings of Edison bulbs cast a warm, forgiving glow. A jazz trio played music that was sophisticated but not intrusive. Everything was curated to communicate a single idea. Robert Taylor had arrived. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, accepting the occasional pat on the back, the vague "great day for your family" comments. I was an accessory to the main event. Dinner was served. Speeches were to begin after the main course. The best man, Robert's business partner, gave a raucous, slightly crude toast full of inside jokes that painted Robert as a shrewd and loyal friend. The maid of honor, the bride's sister, gave a tearful speech about love and sisterhood. Each speech was met with applause, with Robert basking in the spotlight, nodding along as if hearing these wonderful things about himself for the first time. Then it was my turn. Robert had weeks ago, with great ceremony, asked me to speak. "You're my brother," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder. "It wouldn't be right without you." The subtext, as always, was clear. Do your part. Keep it appropriate. Don't embarrass us. I stood from my seat at the family table. I walked to the small podium near the head table. The microphone waited. I adjusted it slightly, the squeal of feedback causing a few winces. I looked out at the sea of 200 faces, family, friends, colleagues, high school acquaintances, curated for maximum social benefit. I saw my parents, smiling expectantly. I saw my new sister-in-law glowing. I saw Robert, leaning back in his chair, one arm draped over the back of it, a look of benign encouragement on his face. He gave me a small, familiar nod. The nod that said, "Go on, be brief." I pulled my notecards from my jacket pocket. I took a slow, quiet breath, and I began the speech I had written for them. "For those who don't know, I'm George, Robert's brother." A polite chuckle. "It's an honor to stand up here today, Robert." Well, we all know Robert. I used his phrase deliberately, and I saw his smile tighten just a fraction. He's the kind of man who makes things happen. The kind of brother who always seems to know the right path. I spoke of vague, generic childhood memories building a treehouse, though I omitted that he'd taken credit for my design. I mentioned his loyalty, though I didn't specify to whom it was primarily directed. It was a speech full of warmth and empty of specifics. It was the speech they wanted. It lasted exactly 3 minutes. The applause was warm, polite, satisfied. I had performed my function. I stepped away from the podium, making room for the next speaker. As I passed Robert's chair, he reached out and clasped my hand. "Thanks, George," he said, his voice thick with faux emotion. "Perfect." He held my gaze for a second too long, and in his eyes, I didn't see gratitude. I saw relief. The relief of a manager whose unpredictable employee has, for once, followed the script. I returned to my seat. The emotional current of the room shifted back to him. My part was over. I was now part of the audience again. I took a sip of wine and watched. The final speech was, of course, Robert's. He didn't need notes. He stood with a casual confidence, tapping his fork gently against his champagne flute, until the tent fell silent. He began by thanking everyone, his voice projected, warm and intimate, all at once. He praised his new wife with elegant, rehearsed-sounding spontaneity. He toasted his in-laws. He was gracious, funny, and in complete command. Then he turned his attention to our family. To my parents, he said, raising his glass. Who taught me the values of hard work and integrity? Who showed me what a lasting marriage looks like? Our mother pressed a hand to her heart. Our father's eyes shone. The spotlight of his affection was a physical thing, and they leaned into its warmth. He paused, letting the moment hang. His gaze swept over me, but didn't land. It was as if I were a column or a potted plant in his line of sight. He took a breath, a performer setting up his closing act. And you know, he said, his tone shifting to one of confidential reflection. Let's be honest. Family is about more than just blood. It's about the people who show up. The ones who are there in the trenches with you. He gestured broadly to his business partner, his college friends clustered at a table. These people, he said, his voice swelling with emotion. This is my foundation. My chosen family. The ones who have been through the real battles with me. A soft, appreciative awe rippled through the crowd. His friends nodded, touched. He continued, his eyes now glistening under the lights. I lost my way for a little while, a few years back. A big deal fell through. My confidence was shot. And it was this crew, he gestured again to his table, that pulled me out of it. They're the ones who reminded me who I was. They showed up every single day with a coffee, with a stupid joke, with a belief in me that I'd somehow lost. I sat perfectly still. The wine glass in my hand felt very heavy. I knew the period he was talking about. It was 5 years ago. The big deal was a property development that had collapsed due to his own overreach. The confidence wasn't just shot. He was clinically depressed, paralyzed by the fear of exposure as a failure. He wouldn't leave his house, and I was the one who showed up every single day. For 4 months, I brought the coffee. I told the stupid jokes. I sat in the dark with him, saying nothing for hours. I handled his ignored mail, made excuses to his partners, quietly used my own savings to cover a bridge loan he desperately needed to keep his creditors from circling. Our parents knew he was stressed, but I had shielded them from the depth of it, at Robert's frantic, ashamed request. Don't tell Mom and Dad, George, please, they'll never look at me the same. I had been his sole confidant, his only lifeline. His chosen family had been conspicuously absent, only returning when the sun began to shine again. And now, in front of 200 people, including our parents, he was erasing me. He was taking my quiet, steadfast loyalty, the most profound service I had ever done for him, and he was laundering it. He was distributing the credit to an audience who would appreciate it more publicly, who better fit the narrative of the dynamic, successful man he needed to be. My 4 months of silence and support were being repackaged as a heartwarming story about his charismatic friends. It wasn't a slight. It wasn't an oversight. It was a complete and total erasure. He finished his speech to a standing ovation. The music swelled. He hugged his friends. He kissed his bride. He beamed under the adoration. The moment was his absolute triumph. I did not move. I watched the celebration erupt around me. I felt a strange, hollow quiet at my center. It was the sound of a final door locking. Not with anger, but with a cold, crystalline clarity. The last faint hope that our dynamic was born of blindness, not design, evaporated. He knew exactly what he had done. The appropriation was too complete, too narratively convenient to be accidental. He had taken my darkest season as his brother, and used it as a spotlight to illuminate his own social worth, carefully editing me out of the frame. A cousin leaned over, shouting over the music. Great speeches, huh? Robert just has a way, doesn't he? I turned my head slowly and looked at her. I offered a small, neutral smile. He does, I agreed, my voice calm. He certainly has a way. I did not cause a scene. I did not confront him. I did not even leave the reception early. I stayed. I danced one dance with our mother. I shook my new sister-in-law's hand. I congratulated Robert again, shaking his hand firmly. Great speech, I said. Thanks, man, he replied, already looking over my shoulder for the next well-wisher. Means a lot. The noise and the laughter and the music felt like a thick pane of glass between me and the rest of the world. I observed it all from a profound and irrevocable distance. He had given the performance of his life. And in doing so, he had handed me, with breathtaking generosity, the one thing I needed most. Absolute, unimpeachable moral certainty. He had shown the entire room, and most importantly, himself, who he truly was. He just didn't realize I'd been taking notes. As the last of the guests drifted away and the staff began clearing tables, I stood alone near the emptying dance floor. A single question hung in the cool night air, a question he would never think to ask, but one that would now dictate everything that followed. When you erase a person from their own history, what do you imagine is left for them to protect? The morning after the wedding, the silence was different. It wasn't the quiet of absence or peace. It was the dense, resonant silence that follows a bell that has been struck, a final, definitive time. I woke in my hotel room. Sunlight cut through the gap in the curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. There was no hangover of anger, no residual ache of hurt. There was only a spacious, surgical clarity. The performance was over. The audience had gone home, and I was no longer in the cast. I packed my suitcase with methodical care. I folded my suit, the one I'd worn to give my harmless little speech, and placed it in a garment bag. I would not be needing it again for a very long time. Downstairs, the hotel restaurant was populated with groggy wedding guests, picking at brunch buffets, exchanging murmured anecdotes from the night before. I saw none of my family. I ate a solitary breakfast of toast and black coffee. I paid my bill in cash. I left no trace. The drive home was 3 hours. I did not play music. I did not make calls. I let the hum of the highway fill the space where my thoughts used to churn. I replayed not the words of Robert's speech, but the architecture of it. The careful construction, the deliberate placement of gratitude, the strategic allocation of credit. It was, I realized, a masterclass in relational accounting. He had audited the emotional ledger of his crisis and found my contributions to be a liability to his brand. So he had written them off. It was, in his world, a sound business decision. I arrived at my house a modest, quiet craftsman in a neighborhood of teachers and engineers, 20 miles from the glittering suburb where Robert and our parents lived. It was mine, purchased with my own salary as a structural analyst for the city. It was unimpressive to them, which meant it was never visited. It was my greatest sanctuary. I did not brood. I did not rage. I simply began. The first step was informational. I had always been the repository for the family's practical burdens, the tedious, unglamorous work. I was the one who handled our elderly aunt's taxes. I was the executor of a distant cousin's meager estate. I had our father's car registration paperwork on file because he found the online portal confusing. I was the backup contact for our mother's pharmacy. This was not because I was trusted with secrets of the heart, but because I was considered a reliable, emotionless utility. I spent that Sunday evening at my home office desk. I opened a fresh digital notebook. I did not title it. I began to list every responsibility, every point of leverage, every thread of practical dependency that connected me to the family ecosystem. It was a cold, factual inventory. Power of attorney financial for Aunt Helen expires in 18 months. Requires renewal. Co-signer on Robert's business line of credit from First Mercantile Bank. Originated 5 years ago during the crisis. Never removed. Trustee on the Taylor Family Revocable Living Trust. A mostly symbolic role, according to our father, but with specific fiduciary duties outlined in Clause 4B. Primary point of contact for the property management company overseeing our parents' rental condo. Holder of the safety deposit box key for our parents' important documents. A copy existed with their lawyer, but they never remembered his name. The list went on for 2 pages. Each item was a small, quiet knot I had tied over years of reliable service. None of it was dramatic. None of it was about love. It was all about function. I was the systems administrator. And I realized, with a calm that felt like stepping onto solid ground after years at sea, that I held root-level access. The following Monday, I called in sick to work. It was the first sick day I had taken in 4 years. I dressed in casual clothes and drove to the county courthouse. I requested the public filings for Robert's primary business entity, Taylor Holdings, LLC. I sat in the sterile records room and read. I saw the liens that had been placed and quietly removed. I saw the permitting variances he'd lobbied for. I saw the signatures. I took no photos. I wrote no notes. I simply let the information settle into the catalog of my understanding. Next, I visited the library. I withdrew a book on trust and estate law for laymen. I read it over 3 days, not with the goal of becoming an expert, but with the goal of understanding the mechanisms. I needed to know how the gears turned, where the pressure points were. I learned about notification requirements, about fiduciary liabilities, about the legal distinctions between a passive and an active trustee. It was dry, painstaking work. It was the opposite of a dramatic confrontation. It was engineering. A week after the wedding, my phone rang. It was Robert. His name flashed on the screen with a photo from years ago, both of us smiling awkwardly at some forgotten barbecue. I let it ring. I watched it go to voicemail. He did not leave a message. An hour later, a text arrived. "Hey George, Mom says she hasn't heard from you. Everything okay? Let's grab a drink this week." The tone was normal. The subtext was a probe. My silence was, for the first time, noticeable. It was a deviation from the script. I waited until the following morning to reply. "All good. Just swamped with work. Talk soon." The message was benign, breezy, and created a shield of plausible busyness. It was also a boundary. Talk soon is not a commitment. I began the process of quiet withdrawal. I did not cancel anything abruptly. That would be an action, and actions provoke reactions. Instead, I initiated slow, procedural transfers. I called Aunt Helen's financial advisor. "I'm streamlining some of my responsibilities," I explained, my voice pleasant and professional. "Could you please send the renewal paperwork for the POA directly to Helen? I'll let her know it's coming. She should review it with her son." I did not specify which son. Helen had 3. I was simply passing the baton, responsibly. I wrote a formal, respectful letter to the law firm that managed the family trust. On my city letterhead, I stated that due to increasing professional demands, I believed it prudent to request a review of the trustee designations to ensure active and engaged management. I cited Clause 4B, regarding the duty of prudent administration. I recommended they schedule a call with my parents and Robert to discuss. I was not resigning. I was raising a flag of conscientious concern. It was unimpeachably proper. The most significant knot was the co-signed line of credit. It was for $150,000. My signature had been the grease that allowed the wheel to turn during his drought. The bank had not required its removal once his finances recovered. It was a forgotten thread, binding my creditworthiness to his ambitions. I could not simply revoke it. That would trigger an immediate review of his account, a potential call of the credit, a confrontation. So, I visited my own bank, where I had banked since I was 18. I met with a personal banker named Sarah, who had helped me with my mortgage. I explained, calmly, that I was looking to undertake a significant personal financial project of potential renovation. Still in the planning stages and wanted to ensure my credit profile was as strong as possible. I asked for a full review and advice on optimizing my debt-to-income ratio. "Of course," she said. When she pulled my report, the joint line of credit appeared. "This is a substantial open line," she noted, politely curious. "It's for my brother's business," I said, with a slight, embarrassed shrug. "A formality from years ago. I should probably address that, shouldn't I? For my own planning. It would be wise," she said. "It counts as your potential liability, if he were to ever draw on it fully." "I understand," I nodded. "What's the most diplomatic way to handle this? I don't want to cause any business disruption." She advised me to send a certified letter to the bank that held the note, requesting a release of obligation based on the restored financial health of the primary borrower. It was a standard procedure. It would trigger a routine financial review of Robert's company. If his numbers were as strong as he always claimed, the release would be granted with a congratulatory note. If they were not, it could take a few months to process, Sarah said. "That's fine," I replied. "I'm a patient planner." I mailed a letter that afternoon. It was not an attack. It was a prudent financial decision. A man looking to renovate his house must tidy his own balance sheet. It was responsible. It was adult. It was also a silent seismic tremor traveling along that forgotten thread, heading directly for the foundation of Robert's carefully curated image. Weeks turned into a month. The seasons began to change. I declined to family dinners with vague but plausible excuses. A work deadline. A minor cold. My absence was now a pattern, but a quiet one. I was busy. I was swamped. The world they understood was one of tangible actions and loud emotions. My strategy existed in the negative space they never thought to examine. The unreturned call, the delegated task, the politely worded letter on official stationery. The point of no return came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was in my backyard, pruning a rose bush. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert I had set for myself months prior. It read, "Dad's 70th birthday planning kickoff." For decades, I had been the family's unofficial event planner. I researched venues, negotiated contracts, collected money, designed invitations. Robert gave the toasts. I handled the logistics. The birthday was still 6 months away. In the old pattern, I would have already begun compiling vendor lists. I stood there, garden shears in my gloved hand, looking at the alert. The sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple. I felt the weight of the expectation, the unspoken assumption that I would, of course, take this on. That I would pour hours of invisible labor into crafting another perfect stage for Robert to shine upon. I swiped the notification away. I did not create a new document. I did not send a brainstorming email. I simply let the deadline pass. I turned off the alert for future dates. In that moment, I was not choosing revenge. I was choosing freedom. I was withdrawing my consent from a system that only valued my silence and my labor. I was ceasing to be the architect of my own invisibility. The power did not lie in something I would do to them. It lay in all the things I would no longer do for them. The silence from my family began to take on a new quality. It was no longer just my silence. It was a mutual, puzzled quiet. They were waiting for me to return to my post, to resume my duties. But the stagehand had left the theater, and slowly, imperceptibly at first, the machinery of the production was beginning to grind. One question, quieter than all the others, began to form in the space I had left behind. When you have built your world upon someone's reliable silence, what happens when that silence becomes, not passive, but profoundly, strategically active? The first sign of fraying was a missed appointment. My mother called, her voice a familiar blend of concern and mild reproach. George, the property manager for the condo, called me. They said there was a scheduled inspection yesterday for the fire suppression system. You were supposed to meet them there with the key. They couldn't get in. I was at my desk at work, reviewing a zoning report. I held the phone with my shoulder, my hands continuing to trace a line on a blueprint. "Oh," I said, my voice flat with the mild surprise of a man remembering a forgotten grocery item. "That was yesterday." "Yes, it was yesterday. I had it on my calendar." "I thought you had it on yours." Her tone implied a failure of a fundamental, predictable order. "I must have missed the reminder," I replied, not with apology, but with simple statement. "The notification probably got buried. You know how work email is." "Did they reschedule?" A pause. This was not the expected script. The script was immediate contrition, a flurry of reorganizing. My calm was a new variable. "Well, they had to charge a $50 re-inspection fee," she said. "The cost a weapon to restore the hierarchy of blame." "I see," I said. "That's unfortunate. You should give Robert a copy of the key. He's closer to that side of town than I am, and his schedule is more flexible." I offered this not as a deflection, but as a logical, efficient solution. "I can text you the property manager's direct number. He's very responsive." Another, longer pause. I could hear the soft hum of her kitchen appliances in the background. I had not just failed the task. I had calmly, politely, offered a permanent reassignment of it. I suppose I could ask him," she said, her confidence thinning. "But you've always handled it." "Times change," I said pleasantly. "I'll text you that number now. Have to run, Mom. Meeting starting. Love you." I ended the call before she could formulate a response. I did not send the number immediately. I waited 2 hours. The delay was not petty. It was a recalibration. My time was no longer instantly available to solve Taylor family. The following week, my father left a voicemail. His voice was gruff, tinged with a confusion he mistook for annoyance. "George, your mother says you're busy. That lawyer fellow for the trust called, wants to have a talk with me and your brother. Says you had some concerns. What's that about? Give me a call." I did not call him back that day, or the next. I let the weekend pass. On Monday morning, I sent a brief email to my father's rarely checked account, copying the lawyer. "Dad, apologies for the delay. Just ensuring I have the correct information before I reply." My note to Mr. Hendricks at the firm was procedural. With my increased workload, I wanted to ensure the trust, which is so important to you and Mum, is getting the active oversight it deserves from someone with the bandwidth to provide it. Robert is far more versed in these asset classes than I am. Mr. Hendricks can explain the details better than I can. He's expecting your call. Best, George. The email was a masterclass in neutral, responsible deflection. It expressed no concern beyond fiduciary duty. It complemented Robert's expertise. It pushed the matter firmly into their court, where I was no longer a player, but a spectator. I had not expressed a single concern of my own. I had merely activated the mechanism of professional oversight. Let them sit in a leather-bound conference room and discuss bond allocations and trustee liabilities. Let Robert perform his understanding of it all. The real tremor, however, began with Aunt Helen. Helen called me, her voice trembling with a proprietary panic. "George, what is this?" "The brokerage sent me a stack of papers this thick. They said you're stepping back from the POA. They want me to appoint someone else. They're talking about suitability assessments. Your cousin Jeremy is livid. He thinks it's about the inheritance. What have you done? I pictured her at her mahogany desk, the formidable social matriarch suddenly confronted with administrative friction. Helen, I said, my voice a soft, steady counterpoint to her vibrato. I haven't done anything but initiate a standard review. The POA renews next year. Given my own commitments, and Jeremy's clear interest, it seemed the prudent thing to do was to start the process early so there's no lapse. You're in perfect health. It's just good planning. I used their language. Prudent, good planning. Jeremy would be a natural choice. He's so engaged. The flattery was surgical. Jeremy, her eldest son, was avaricious and impatient, already counting his future inheritance. By nominating him as the natural choice, I had not created a conflict. I had simply removed the buffer Meath had been containing it. Helen's family was now staring at the machinery of their own future, and it made them nervous. My quiet, competent management had been a peacekeeping force. Its withdrawal created a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Then came the first, faint signal from Robert's citadel. It was a text, not about family logistics, but with a strange, forced casualness. Hey George, quick question. You hear anything from First Mercantile lately? The question was a probe, wrapped in nonchalance. The bank would have received my certified letter weeks ago. They would have begun their review. They would have contacted Taylor Holdings for updated financials. It was a routine request. Unless, of course, providing those financials was not entirely routine. I waited 90 minutes before replying. First Mercantile. No, nothing. Why? His response was immediate. No reason. Just some paperwork they're asking for. Probably automatic. How's things? He was backpedaling, smothering his initial concern with vague generality. Probably automatic. He was trying to convince himself. I could feel the first prickle of his anxiety through the screen. The forgotten thread had been tugged, and something in his foundation had creaked. Things are good. I wrote back. Quiet. You know me. Yeah, he replied. I do, but that was the problem. He didn't. He knew the version of me that smoothed things over. He did not know the man who could calmly choose not to smooth them. The confusion in the family ecosystem began to manifest in small, surreal ways. An invitation to a birthday dinner was sent with an explicit, unusual addendum. Please RSVP directly to Robert. The unspoken message was clear. My former role as the RSVP clearinghouse was revoked. I was now a guest, subject to the same tracking as any other. IRSVPD. No, citing a prior commitment. A true one. A community planning board meeting I actually enjoyed attending. My mother called again. This time about my father's 70th. We need to start thinking about venues, she said, her voice tentative. Testing. You always have such good ideas. I'm sure you and Robert will choose something wonderful, I said. His taste is impeccable. I'm happy to be a guest and contribute to the gift. I had gently, irrevocably, handed the baton back. I had not refused to help. I had simply celebrated Robert's superior ability. It was a compliment that felt, to her, like a dereliction of duty. She sputtered for a moment, then hung up. The pinnacle of their quiet panic arrived in the form of a lunch invitation. Not from my mother, or my father. From Robert. He suggested a trendy bistro halfway between his office and mine. Neutral territory. The subtext was a summit. I accepted. He was already seated when I arrived, sipping sparkling water. He looked the same expensive watch, tailored shirt, the easy posture of command. But there was a new tension around his eyes, a faint etching of preoccupation he couldn't quite massage away. He stood and clapped me on the shoulder, the old gesture. It felt performative. Good to see you, man, he said. You've been a ghost. Just busy, I smiled, taking my seat. You know how it is. We made small talk about sports, about the weather. It was all preamble. Finally, over the main course, he leaned in. His verbal habit appeared, but it was weaker, less assured. Let's be honest, George, Mom and Dad are a little worried. They feel like you're pulling away. I took a bite of my salmon, chewed slowly, and swallowed. I met his gaze. That's not my intention. I'm just at a different stage, focusing on my own priorities. I assumed, after your wedding speech, that you'd all understand. I let the last phrase hang, innocent and heavy. He blinked. A tiny fissure appeared in his charm. Understand what? That you have your chosen family, I said, my tone warm, supportive. Your foundation. It sounded like you have everything handled. I didn't want to intrude. I'm just giving you all space to enjoy that. I was weaponizing his own words, reflecting them back with serene agreement. I was not accusing him of betrayal, I was congratulating him on his independence, and, by extension, claiming my own. He was utterly disarmed. How do you argue with someone who is parroting your own triumph back to you as a reason for their benign absence? It's not an intrusion, George, my brother. I know, I said, smiling softly. And I'm glad you have such a great support system. Really, it takes the pressure off everyone. The lunch concluded with stilted pleasantries. He picked up the check, a reassertion of his role as the successful one, the provider. I let him. As we walked out, he paused. This stuff, with the bank, and the trust lawyer. You're sure you haven't heard anything? There it was. The core of his anxiety, laid bare. It wasn't about my emotional distance. It was about the silent procedural mechanisms I had set in motion. They were ticking in the background, and he could hear them, but he couldn't find the source of the sound. Not a thing, I said, my face a mask of mild brotherly concern. Is everything okay with the business? His smile was tight, brilliant, and utterly false. Never better, just paperwork. The gaslighter was now trying to gaslight himself. I drove back to my quiet house. I felt nothing resembling triumph. I felt the quiet certainty of a physicist who has calculated a trajectory and now watches the object begin its arc through the void. The forces were in motion. Gravity would do the rest. They were experiencing the first symptoms of a new reality, a world where my compliance could not be assumed. My silence could no longer be counted on to hide their faults or enable their comforts. They were confused because the equation had changed, and they didn't have the new variables. One question now began to haunt their comfortable lives. A question I would never voice aloud. When you have spent a lifetime relying on someone to quietly clean up the mess, what do you do when you finally have to look at the mess itself? The reveal did not happen in a thunderclap. It happened in a series of quiet clicks, like a well-made lock disengaging. It began with my father's birthday dinner. I attended. I bought a thoughtful, moderately priced gift, a first edition copy of a naval history book I knew he'd appreciate but never buy for himself. I arrived precisely on time. I wore a simple sweater and slacks. I was a guest. Not the planner, not the helper, not the son tasked with managing the evening. Just a guest. The venue was a private room in a steakhouse Robert had chosen. It was loud, opulent, and subtly competitive. Robert held court, of course. But I noticed a strain beneath his performance. He checked his phone too often, his laughter a half-beat behind the conversation. The lawyers' meeting about the trust had happened. My father, over cocktails, had grumbled to me about a lot of jargon and paperwork. Robert, he said, had handled it, but seemed agitated by the process. The system was asking for documentation, for justifications. It was asking Robert to prove, on paper, the narrative he performed so effortlessly in person. I circulated. I spoke to aunts, uncles, cousins. I was pleasant. I was brief. I offered no updates on my life, beyond work is fine. Thank you for asking. I asked questions about theirs. I was a mirror, reflecting nothing of myself back. It was unnerving to them. They were used to extracting my labor or my quiet emotional support. They didn't know how to handle my polite, impenetrable neutrality. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. Robert gave the main toast. It was good. It was fluid. But it lacked the transcendent, magnetic confidence of his wedding speech. He kept glancing at our father, as if seeking confirmation he was hitting the right notes. Our father smiled, but it was the polite smile of a man being performed for, not the radiant pride of before. Then, something happened, a small thing. My Uncle Mark, a blunt, retired engineer who'd never been particularly impressed by Robert's shine, raised his glass after Robert finished. And let's not forget, George, he boomed, a little too much wine in his voice. The quiet one, who actually gets things done. Your dad's always said you're the reliable one. Hell, you got me out of a jam with the IRS that one year. Here's to George. It was clumsy, awkward, and completely devastating. The room froze in a microsecond of social panic. All eyes flicked to Robert, then to me. It was an unscripted moment, a crack in the family narrative. Robert's smile remained fixed, but it became a physical object, something he had to consciously hold on his face. My mother's eyes widened slightly. My father looked down at his plate. I simply raised my glass, a small, humble gesture. Just doing my part, Uncle Mark, I said, my voice calm and carrying just enough. But this is Robert's night. To Dad, I deftly redirected the toast back to its intended target. A display of the very grace I was now withholding from their daily lives. But the seed was planted. The words hung in the air. The quiet one who actually gets things done. After dessert, as coats were being fetched, Robert cornered me near the restrooms. The charming facade was sanded thin. What was that about? He hissed, keeping his voice low. What was what? I asked, genuine confusion in my tone. Mark, that little performance. He's had a lot to drink. Robert, I said, my tone one of gentle chastisement. He was trying to be nice. Don't make it a thing. I was now the one advising him to keep the peace. A role reversal so subtle it was dizzying. He stared at me, his eyes searching for a hidden smirk, a glint of triumph. He found only serene, brotherly concern. It infuriated him more than any confrontation would have. The bank called, he said abruptly, the words escaping like a pressure release. Oh, I said. They're asking for a lot. Updated P&Ls, projections, for a line of credit that's been dormant for years. That seems odd, I mused, frowning slightly. Unless it's a routine audit. Or maybe your profile triggered a review for a limit increase. That's a good sign. Usually, I was offering him benign, optimistic explanations. I was being supportive. And with each one, I watched the doubt deepen in his eyes, because he knew the state of his books better than I did. He knew if they could withstand a banker's cold, professional scrutiny. My calm conjectures were a spotlight on his own private fears. Yeah, he said, not believing it. Maybe. Well, I said, clapping him on the shoulder, perfect mimic of his old gesture. I'm sure you've got it handled. You always do. The controlled reveal reached its quiet zenith 2 weeks later, at a meeting I did not attend. It was a Sunday. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. Her voice was strange and shaky, stripped of its usual melodic certainty. George, are you sitting down? I'm in the garden, Mom. What's going on? It's your brother. A long, tremulous breath. He's here, at the house, with Dad. They're in the study. They're shouting. I said nothing. I watched a bumblebee navigate the lavender. Your father. He's so angry. I've never heard him like this. Her words were spilling out now, a confession to the one listener she had left. That bank, First Mercantile. They declined to renew the line of credit. They sent a letter. They cited inconsistent cash flow projections and over-leverage in related entities. What does that mean, George? Robert is trying to explain. But your father had the lawyer pull the trust statements after that meeting. He's been comparing them to Robert's business proposals from last year. He says the numbers don't He says Robert was trying to use the trust as collateral for a loan. A loan the bank just said no to. The clicks were falling into place. My request for a trustee review had forced transparency. My request for a release from the co-signed loan had triggered a financial review. The two separate, prudent actions had converged like searchlights, crossing on the unstable ground of Robert's actual financial situation. Is Dad okay? I asked, my voice soft with concern for the right person. He's heartbroken. He feels lied to. Robert is saying it's all a misunderstanding, that Dad doesn't grasp how modern finance works. Her voice broke. He used that phrase. Let's be honest, he said. Let's be honest. Dad, you've never understood the pressure I'm under. Your father told him to get out. I let the silence on the line speak. I could hear muffled, distant yelling in the background of her call. The perfect son was screaming at his father, in the study of the perfect family home. What do I do, George? She whispered, a plea. This was the moment. The power had shifted, naturally, irrevocably. They were not looking to Robert for solutions. They were looking to me, the reliable one, the quiet one. And for the first time, I did not rush to fix it. Mom, I said, my voice the still point in her turning world. I think you should let them have this out. It sounds like it's been coming for a long time. Make yourself a cup of tea. Go sit in the sunroom. Don't get in the middle of it. My advice was not to take action, but to stop taking action. It was to let the consequences, now fully airborne, land. It was the ultimate withdrawal of support not from her, but from the decades-old pattern of enabling Robert's narrative. But, he's your brother. I know, I said. And he's a grown man. He'll have to explain his own numbers to his own banker, and to his own father. There's nothing I can do about that. The truth was now undeniable in that house. It was not a truth, I shouted. It was a truth I had quietly, methodically uncovered by removing myself as the layer that had always hidden it. Robert's greatest fear exposure was being realized not through an enemy's attack, but through the absence of his brother's silent protection. Later that night, my father called. He sounded old, and tired down to his bones. The trust is being moved to a corporate trustee, he said flatly. No more family management. Your mother is a wreck. Robert, he's not who I thought he was. There was a long pause. You tried to tell us, didn't you? With that letter to the lawyer. I did not say yes. I did not say no. I simply said, I was concerned about your best interests, Dad. That's all. He sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. He's been using our money as a backstop for years, making it look stronger than it was. The lawyer says it's not illegal, but it's a betrayal. He was finally using the right word. Why didn't you say something sooner? This was the final click. The question that absolved me and indicted them in the same breath. Dad, I said, my voice gentle, final. You never asked. The line went quiet. There was nothing more to say. The revelation was complete. The charming, influential son was revealed as a manipulative risk to the family's stability. The quiet, overlooked son was revealed as the only one who had acted with true, if silent, integrity. The power did not shift with a declaration. It shifted with a realization, echoing in the silence of my father's study after the door had slammed shut. They finally understood the man they had dismissed, and they finally understood the cost of that dismissal. But understanding is not the same as reconciliation. So I'll ask you, the one listening, when the truth finally stands revealed, bare and unavoidable, which is more painful, the lie that was lived, or the trust that was quietly, patiently, and deliberately withdrawn? The aftermath was not a storm. It was a long, cold season. The kind where the sun shines, but gives no warmth. Robert did not call me. Not for a week, not for a month. The silence from his direction was total, a wall of scorched pride. I heard the updates through the brittle, careful phone calls from my mother. The corporate trustee had taken over the family assets. The terms were stricter. There would be no more bridge loans or strategic investments. The money was locked down, safe, and impersonal. Robert's business, she relayed in a hushed tone, was restructuring. A polite word. I saw the public records online. Taylor Holdings, LLC, dissolved. A new entity formed with a partner's name first. A demotion. My father aged 5 years in as many weeks. He took up woodworking in the garage, building intricate, useless boxes. He called me sometimes, not to talk about anything in particular, but just to talk. About the weather, about the news, about the boxes. He never mentioned Robert. He never apologized for the decades of blindness. But in his newfound quiet, in his reliance on my steady, undemanding presence on the other end of the line, the apology was etched into every pause. My mother's calls were different. They were filled with a desperate, fluttering energy. She was trying to glue the pieces of her world back together, but the adhesive of our old dynamics, my compliance, Robert's performance, had lost its bond. Robert and Jessica are coming for dinner Sunday, she would say, her voice bright with forced hope. You'll come, won't you? It would mean so much. I would decline, always with a concrete, unassailable reason. Prior plans, a work trip, a commitment. I was not rejecting her. I was rejecting the stage upon which the old play would attempt to run. My absence was the only honest response. He's sorry, you know, she blurted out during one call, 2 months after the study door had slammed. Is he? I asked, not with sarcasm, but with genuine, calm curiosity. Of course he is. He's your brother. It's broken the family. The family isn't broken, Mom, I said, looking out my window at the quiet street. It's just being seen clearly for the first time. That can feel like a break. She didn't have an answer for that. She was still living in the world of emotions and scenes. I was describing the world of structures and truths. An invitation arrived in the mail, for a charity gala Robert had chaired for years. His name was notably absent from the letterhead this year. My name was on the guest list. I did not RSVP. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, he appeared at my door. I saw him through the sidelight, standing under a black umbrella. His suit impeccable, but his posture slumped, as if the weight of the fabric was too much. I felt no surge of adrenaline, no tightness of anger. I felt a distant, analytical pity. I opened the door. George, he said. The charm was gone. The performance was exhausted. What stood before me was a man hollowed out by exposure. Robert, I nodded. Come in. You'll get wet. He stepped into my foyer, closing his umbrella with clumsy hands. He looked around my living room, at its shelves of books, its comfortable worn-in furniture, its utter lack of pretense. I saw him see it, perhaps for the first time. It was not a place to impress. It was a place to live. Can I get you some coffee? I asked. No, thank you. He stood awkwardly, not moving to sit. I came to talk. I gestured to the sofa, and took the armchair across from it. I did not speak. I waited. The silence in my house was different from the silence in our parents' home. Mine was peaceful. His was suffocating. I got the letter from First Mercantile. The final denial. He spoke to the floor. The new business, The capital calls are tighter. My partner is cautious. He was trying to explain his crisis, still framing it as a business problem, an external problem. I said nothing. He looked up, his eyes seeking mine. They were red-rimmed, tired. Dad won't take my calls. Mom tries, but she just cries. I remained silent. They listen to you, he said, and the words were ripped from him. The final, humiliating admission. If you talked to them, smoothed things over, we could get past this. There it was. The request. Not for forgiveness. For intermediation. For me to resume my old role as the family's shock absorber, to soak up the impact of his actions, so the system could return to its comfortable, fraudulent equilibrium. He was not asking for a brother. He was asking for a functionary. I took a slow breath. Robert, I said, my voice quiet and even. What is it you want me to say to them? He seized the opening, a flicker of the old tactical energy in his eyes. Just that. It was a misunderstanding. That business is complicated. That I've learned my lesson. That family is more important than money. He was scripting my speech for me, just as he always had. I let his words hang in the air between us. I let him hear their hollow, rehearsed quality. But is that true? I asked. He blinked. What? Is family more important than money to you? I clarified. Not as an accusation, but as a philosophical inquiry. Your actions, the ones the bank and the lawyer saw, suggest otherwise. I can't tell them something I don't believe to be true. It wouldn't be fair to them, or to you. He stared at me, his jaw working silently. The gaslighter had run out of gas. The performer had no audience willing to suspend their disbelief. He had come for a tool my credibility and I had politely informed him it was no longer for rent. So, that's it, he whispered, anger finally seeping through the cracks. You just sit here in your quiet house and watch it burn. I'm not watching anything burn, Robert, I said. I'm living my life. You made choices. Those choices have consequences. I didn't create the consequences. I just stopped hiding them for you. He stood up abruptly. The movement was jerky, uncontrolled. You always were cold, he spat, the last weapon in his arsenal. A final attempt to define me. I stood as well, calm, a host seeing a guest to the door. No, I corrected him softly. I was warm. For a very long time. You just never felt the temperature until I turned it off. He left. The rain had lessened. He didn't open his umbrella. He just walked to his car. His shoulders bowed under the drizzle. That was the last time we spoke. The holidays came. I spent Thanksgiving with a friend's family. At Christmas, I went to my parents' house for a few hours in the afternoon. Robert was not there. The air was clear, but thin, like the air after a fire has passed through a forest. The underbrush is gone. You can see for miles. But all that's left are the trunks of the oldest trees, blackened and standing. My mother hugged me a little too long. My father shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, awkward embrace. They gave me a gift, a simple, expensive pen. For all your paperwork, my father said, with a sad, knowing glance. It was an acknowledgement, not of my pain, but of my competence. It was the only kind of apology he was capable of giving. I gave them a photo album I'd had made. It contained pictures of them, from their wedding day to recent years. None of Robert, none of me, just them. A story of two people. They cried when they opened it. They didn't understand why, but I did. I had given them back their own story, separate from the roles of parents to rival sons. It was a gift of separation, a gift of clarity. I left before dinner. I drove home in the early winter dark. My house was quiet. I made myself a simple meal. I read a book. There was no dramatic closure, no grand reconciliation. There was, instead, a profound and lasting peace. Justice had cost me my family. Not the idea of it, but the flawed, painful reality of it. It had cost me the identity of the loyal son, the reliable brother. In its place, I had gained a quieter, truer identity. My own. They finally understood. I didn't explain further. Some truths don't need witnesses. They just need the courage to stop hiding them. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The one that lingers after the story is told. When the quiet one stops quieting the storm, is he causing the wreckage, or simply allowing everyone to finally see the ship was always headed for the rocks? The answer, I've found, changes everything.